Well, welcome to today's session, everyone. Committing to climate change, opportunities in Victoria. We are pleased to be partnering with the Australia-UK Chamber of Commerce for the delivery of this webinar. And I am Tim Dillon, the Victorian Agent General to the United Kingdom and Commissioner to Europe and Israel, based in London. Our office works to support UK and European companies to set up and expand in Victoria. Now, although we are meeting from across the world, the Victorian government acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to the elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. So just to start, some quick general housekeeping. If I could ask everyone to keep their microphones off during the session, that would be much appreciated. I'm also delighted to be introducing today an esteemed panel of speakers. We're very privileged to have the Honourable Lily D'Ambrosio, the Victorian Minister for Energy, Environment and Climate Change, and who is also the Victorian Minister for Solar Homes. In addition to the Minister, we have Alba Ruiz-Leon, who is the Managing Director of CORNWALL Insights Australia, and Peter Cowling, Country Head, Australia and New Zealand for Vestas. Following the presentations, we will have a Q&A session and we'll be joined by Anthea Harris, Deputy Secretary, Energy Group in the Victorian Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning. So please post your questions throughout the presentations and we'll get to them at the end using the Q&A feature provided. Currently, we are 4 days out from the UN Climate Change Conference, COP26. The summit has been described as a turning point for humanity and the most consequential summit ever. It is great to be joined by people from all over the world to discuss the action that Victoria is taking to address climate change ahead of COP26 and explore the opportunities that exist for international companies to support Victoria's energy transition. As mentioned before, we are honoured to welcome here today the Honourable Lily D'Ambrosio, the Victorian Minister for Energy, Environment and Climate Change. Minister D'Ambrosio is a leader in action on climate change, renewable energy and energy efficiency in Australia. She oversaw the passage of the Climate Change Act, Victoria's landmark climate legislation, which saw it become the first Australian state and one of the first in the world to legislate in line with the Paris Agreement for net zero emissions by 2050. She was appointed Minister of Energy and Resources in 2014, and during this time has led on the transformation of Victoria's energy system. The share of renewable energy powering Victorian homes and businesses has grown from around 11% in 2014 to more than 26% in 2020, which exceeded our target of 25%. Victoria is taking decisive action to transition to renewable energy, and the Minister is delivering a wide range of initiatives to decarbonise the Victorian economy. So without further ado, I'd like to call on Minister D'Ambrosio to give us some further insights and discuss these opportunities with you. Over to you, Minister.
Hello, and thank you very much, Tim, for your welcome, your introductory comments. And I'm absolutely delighted to join you today for this very exciting online event. And I'm coming to you today from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations here in Victoria. And I pay my respects to all elders, past, present and emerging, and any who may be joining with us here during this event. I want to, of course, also acknowledge Alba Ruiz-Leon and Peter Cowling and Anthea Harris. In just 4 days, COP26 will begin in Glasgow. This crucial conference brings together countries from across the world to drive progress in dealing with the increasingly urgent challenge of climate change. Expectations are high this year. And they are high for a meeting where ambitious but credible goals are set for this critical decade of action, where we simply must halve our emissions, if not go further, if we have any chance of meeting the aspirations to keep warming to as close as possible to 1.5 degrees. Today, I'll talk about our energy transformation and look at some of the most exciting large-scale investment opportunities in development in our state. Tim started to describe some of the key achievements that we've been able to meet in the years that we've been in government. Over the last 7 years, Victoria has indeed established itself as a leader nationally and around the world in the development of clean energy. This is due in large part to the depth and maturity of our renewable energy policy. Through our Climate Change Act, which we brought to existence in 2017, we have made it our goal to achieve net zero emissions in Victoria by 2050. We've also, as part of that legislation, set ourselves the clear obligation to identify interim emissions reduction targets on 5-yearly basis. And that's a really very important tool to ensure that we've got the discipline in place to have strong ambition early on and ensure that we don't leave it to the back end of 2050 period for us to do the heavy lifting. Earlier this year, I announced our climate change strategy, which includes our interim emissions reduction target of halving our emissions by 2030. These targets confirm Victoria's position as a climate leader in the country and amongst leading jurisdictions worldwide, such as the United States and the European Union. I'm proud to say that between June 2019 and December 2020, just those 18 months, Victoria connected 1.6 gigawatts of large-scale renewables, more than in any other state in Australia. And in the first 3 months of this year, we hit nearly 30% renewable electricity generation. This leadership has made Victoria into a global destination for clean energy investment. And I'm going to talk about some of the key areas where there is significant investment opportunity. So in particular, 6 of the key large-scale areas of investment opportunity that exist today in Victoria, which are supporting our ongoing renewable energy transition. The first are the renewable energy auctions being delivered under our Victorian Renewable Energy Target. Our Victorian Renewable Energy Target provides long-term policy certainty to the private sector that investing in Victoria's renewable energy industry is viable. It's not only viable, it is absolutely welcomed by us. We've already smashed our first VRET target for renewable energy generation of 25% of electricity generation in Victoria by 2020. And we are well on the way to achieving our second target of 40% by 2025. Next will be our 2030 target of 50% by 2030. Our first VRET auction has brought forward 6 wind and solar farm projects that will deliver a combined 928 megawatts of new renewable energy capacity. This will generate $1.1 billion of investment in Victoria, creating 900 jobs in the construction phase and retain a further 600 existing jobs. Our second VRET auction is underway right now, and it's open for bids of new large-scale renewable energy projects until the 7th of December of this year. It aims to bring online at least 600 megawatts of new renewable capacity and is part of meeting our pledge to power all of the Victorian government's operations, from schools, hospitals, rail, government buildings, the entire metro train network, with 100% renewable electricity. That is the type of leadership I believe is important to make it absolutely clear and keep underlining to the global investment community that Victoria is an attractive and serious place to invest. These VRET auctions are helping to drive strong economic growth in our state, creating jobs and attracting green investment to support the economic recovery from the pandemic. In fact, our first VRET auctions are a large part of the reasons, both of our auctions are a large part of the reason we've created more jobs in renewables than in any other state in Australia. So overall in this financial year, large-scale renewable projects in development in Victoria are estimated to support $6.2 billion in capital expenditure and more than 5,400 jobs. I'd also now like to discuss our plans to unlock Victoria's 6 renewable energy zones. The renewable energy zones are about identifying across our state the most lucrative places for where investment ought to go for renewable energy. for that transformation. Our solar and wind resources are dispersed across the state, and we need to strengthen the grid in those places with the greatest renewable energy potential. By identifying regions that are rich in renewable energy resources, we can target and coordinate investment to successfully transition the energy system. This sends yet another strong signal that Victoria is creating long-term certainty for clean energy investors. The Victorian government is providing $540 million to develop zones through our Renewable Energy Zone Fund. This is more than any other state, and we believe that it's one that will certainly unlock great opportunity. The investment will support the delivery of our Renewable Energy Zone Development Plan and help us build network infrastructure that is necessary to strengthen the grid and unlock the potential of the RESs. In total, Victoria's Renewable Energy Zone Development Plan would support an additional 10 gigawatts of new large-scale renewable energy capacity by 2040. We've also established VicGrid as a division within my department to coordinate the development of the Victorian RESs and oversee investment decisions related to the RES Fund. In August 2021, we announced the procurement of processes for stage 1 projects of the RES development plan, 6 new energy projects that will increase the amount of energy being delivered from current renewable energy generators and reduce cost and risk for developers wanting to connect in Victoria. A tender process for stage 1 projects run by the Australian Energy Market Operator on our behalf is currently underway, and I look forward to announcing the successful projects soon. We're also working very hard to be the first state in Australia to develop an offshore wind energy sector. We know that this technology has great potential to support Victoria's energy transition, delivering extraordinary investment prospects and job creation. Advances in technology and falling costs have seen global growth in this space over the last 10 years. And in Victoria, we are fortunate to have the best offshore wind resource in the country and amongst the best in the world, which is why the first round of our $108 million Energy Innovation Fund was dedicated to offshore wind proposals. Victoria has the most advanced project proposals in the country, and we aim to kickstart the industry on behalf of the rest of the country. We are also developing an offshore wind strategy, which will highlight the opportunities for offshore wind in the state and identify how the Victorian government can best support the development of a sustainable and thriving industry. I look forward to announcing the successful projects from the first round of our Energy Innovation Fund soon. We are also intent on solving the next big emissions challenge in the energy sector. That is, what do we do about natural gas? Firstly, here are some important facts about Victoria and our reliance on gas, which are rooted in historical gas supplies and our colder winters. Victoria's share of the Australian population is around 25%, yet our domestic gas consumption is 37% of the East Coast gas market, and that's principally the majority of the population in the country. There are 2.2 million customers connected to gas. 61% of Victoria's gas use is residential and commercial. Space heating is the leading use of natural gas in Victoria at 60.5%. And due to Victoria's colder winters, winter peak demand is 3 times higher than in summer. The second highest gas use is industry for manufacturing process heating at 30%. The gas sector accounts for 15.8% of Victoria's total emissions, so it's not an insignificant challenge for us, but equally it is a significant opportunity. My objective is to land the critical pathways we need to reduce emissions in the gas sector with a clear eye on what we need to achieve by 2030. Importantly, as we have done with decarbonising the electricity sector, my intent is to deliver economic growth and investment, good jobs and greater affordability for all Victorians as we carefully lay down the policies along those critical pathways. The pathways are improved energy efficiency, greater electrification, substituting natural gas with renewable hydrogen and renewable methane and biogas, and tackling fugitive emissions. We are the only state to do this important work, and we stand to reap significant benefits as a result. I'm excited by this next major policy plank in our decarbonisation agenda, and we will have more to say on our plans in the coming months. As mentioned, we expect renewable hydrogen to be a key player in Victoria's clean energy sector. Our existing competitive advantages include extensive gas networks, a highly skilled gas workforce, world-class education and research institutions, connected transport networks, and export-ready infrastructure. We've outlined our vision in our renewable hydrogen industry development plan. We're starting to build capacity. By building capacity, by supporting our education sector to build the skills for renewable hydrogen through the Victorian Higher Education State Investment Fund. This has included $10 million for Swinburne University's Victorian Hydrogen Hub, $9 million to support Deakin University's High Cell Technology Hub, and $4.7 million for the University of Melbourne's ZEE Lab. We've supported the establishment of 4 regional Victorian hydrogen technology clusters and launched the Victorian Hydrogen Technology Clusters Network. These will connect businesses, universities, innovators, local and state government agencies, and communities to develop renewable hydrogen projects. And on top of our Energy Innovation Fund, we are offering $7.2 million in grants as part of the Renewable Hydrogen Business Ready Fund and Commercialisation Pathways Fund to ensure the market and our economy is ready to take advantage of this emerging technology. Finally, we are driving the rapid decarbonisation of Victoria's transport sector. I made mention of some of that earlier with our efforts in terms of having renewable energy being the source of power to run our trains and our tram network. We've committed to the goal that half of all new light vehicle sales in Victoria will be zero emissions vehicles by 2030. And we have released zero emissions vehicle roadmap to outline how we will position the state to take full advantage of the emerging global shift towards this new technology. The roadmap is supported by a $100 million package of new policies and programs that will help Victoria achieve this goal, including $46 million for a ZEV subsidy program, the first of its type in Australia, $19 million to roll out more charging infrastructure on major highways as key tourist and community destinations, and to support the rollout of new charging infrastructure for commercial and government fleets. $20 million for a zero-emission bus trial to support the transition to 100% of all new public transport buses to zero emissions from 2025. $5 million to establish a commercial sector ZEV innovation fund to encourage the uptake of ZEV commercial vehicles, and $10 million to add 400 electric vehicles to the Victorian government fleet over the next 2 years, I apologise. Further, we have commissioned an expert panel to report back to government in the coming months on what the new tranche of policy proposals could look like for us to be able to meet the objectives that we have stated for ourselves to achieve in terms of reduced emissions from transport sector by 2030. So what we've announced now is the first tranche. The expert panel will present proposals for a further tranche of government effort and support. So 7 years ago, we jump-started Victoria's clean energy revolution, and today we are a national and international leader on climate change and renewable energy development. And I am absolutely pleased and proud to say that we led the way on the really strong, robust targets for renewable energy of 50%, and also halving our emissions by 2030 has led other states to jump in on board and come in behind us in recent weeks. We've created strong policy frameworks and the legislated targets and invested massively in the programs and the technologies that will drive investment and decarbonise our economy. I want to thank you for your attention today. I do want to invite you to take part in Victoria's clean energy transition. And I will be delighted to engage directly with any of you, even across the ways, in lieu of being able to meet in person. Hopefully international travel will be able to be resumed in the not too distant future. But other than that, I stand ready, my department stands ready to have that direct conversation with you because we know that Victoria will present a very attractive place for investment for you. And we want to be able to go deeper into the fantastic outcomes that we've been able to achieve thus far, and how we will continue to make our economy not just a viable but a very attractive and ambitious place for investment to come to. So thank you very much, Tim.
Thank you very much, Minister, for sharing your vision for the transition of the Victorian economy. It's clear that you have not only achieved a lot, but you have a heavy schedule of works ahead of you. So we're really grateful that you've made the time to join us here today to talk about that. I'd now like to introduce Alba Ruiz-Leon, Managing Director, CORNWALL Insights Australia. Alba has over 15 years of energy market experience, including more than 12 years of practical exposure in the APAC region. Alba brings a wealth of expertise to her role at CORNWALL Insights Australia. She has held leading positions for energy industry at Energy Renewables Australia, at Vestas Australia and New Zealand, Energy Australia, and at Acciona Energy Oceania, and consulting companies such as AMO Renewables, GHD Advisory, and Ausenco. Most recently, Alba was Managing Director for Energy Renewables Australia, a subsidiary of RWE. Alba established the business in Australia from scratch and made the office operative to be able to construct, connect, and operate the largest solar farm in Australia. Alba will be sharing her experiences and insights on the opportunities in the market, particularly related to hydrogen and zero-emission vehicles. So I look forward to your comments, Alba, and over to you.
Thank you, Tim Dillon, for the introduction. Really lovely. And thank you for the acknowledgement for the Honourable Lily D'Ambrosio. So with that, hopefully I can help the audience here in the call to understand a little bit more about the opportunities in the energy sector, including hydrogen, electrical vehicles, and other opportunities in renewables coming up for the next 20 years. So maybe we can share the screen with some of the slides. Thank you. We'll probably pass to the next slide, please. Thank you. I would just like to introduce really briefly CORNWALL Insights Australia. It's been operating in Australia for about 3 years. We've got 14 staff in the ground. About 2 in Sydney, 3 in our. Also, we've got in Newcastle, Sunshine Coast, Victoria, in Melbourne, and Dandenong branches as well. So also in Adelaide. So we're very well spread across the geography. And our mission is to support the energy transition across the country, and with a special focus in Victoria, where we have 8 of our experts. I've worked in Victoria for about 12 plus years, building the largest wind farm in the Southern Hemisphere around 2009. And since I gained a lot of experience about the energy market and Australia as a whole, hopefully I can share some of that experience with you today, and I'll unlock some of the opportunities on the renewable energy zones here in Victoria and beyond. So with that, if we can pass to the next slide, please. It is a really good chart, this one here on the right, where you can see really clearly the different energy production that is happening today to 2040. It is really clear how the coal industry will be declining. You can see on the left-hand side how Geelong Power Station, where I've worked in the past as well, will be reducing its energy production and terminating around 2028, which, if you go to the chart on the right-hand side, it is really clear those colors on the top, they're difficult to see, but they are a little bit sort of greenish and yellow on the top. That is exactly the opportunity that will be unlocked in Australia when Geelong leaves the market. So our forecast models expecting that the solar opportunity will be about 15 to 20%, And the rest, which is our largest opportunity, will be for wind coming up with Geelong. But we can also see how Loyan A and Loyan B will be leaving the market around 2047 and 2048, which in total will make an opportunity of 1200 12.7 case on megawatts that will need to be replaced by renewables, mostly wind and solar for Victoria. The split for wind is a little bit larger than solar, particularly in Victoria. And you can see that the opportunity will be a step change from 2 years before those large power stations will be retired. So it is really important for new developers and investors to start really understanding when the opportunity will become available, because that's exactly when those projects, due to the different timeframes and lead times of construction, will need to be set up 2, 3 to 4, 1.5 years before the energy is required on the area. If we pass to the next slide, please. Here is really well explained how between 2025 and 2040, how the split between coal will be under split in wind and solar. So you can see really clearly that 2025, we just picked up 2025 and 2040, which give us a really good overview of what will be the split and the decrease on coal and the augmentation in the production of wind and solar renewables by 2040. If you go please to the next slide. I wanted to show in this graph, which is really interesting, because where the opportunity lies is what has not been committed and proposed versus what will be getting out of the market in future years. So if you think about what is truly committed in the market at this point of time, there is a little bit of an expansion of Loyan A Unit 2 for coal, but mostly it is in solar and wind. But all add up, it's not more than 748 megawatts. And as we have seen on the previous slide, the requirement by 2048 will be of 12,700 megawatts. So the opportunity in variable renewable resources will be of 11,000.9 megawatts by 2048. As we explained before, if you please go to the next slide, it is really clear how the step change happens when Geelong retires around 2028, and then when Loyan A and Loyan B retires, depending on the energy, on the basically the energy that will be put through to surpass that power station retirement. Then the earlier stages of construction commissioning will need to be done before ahead of time. If we please go to the next slide, please. I'd like to mention that in terms of hydrogen, there has been a lot of talks about hydrogen in Australia for a very long time now, but the main point I'll raise, and I'll get to the LCOE that I'm sure LCOE 2 that everyone wants to hear about, is that the importers that have shown interest on importing hydrogen are really close located to Australia. So Australia is really well positioned in terms of location and in terms of the abundance of the renewable energy resources, as well as natural resources. And we've got the existing infrastructure and knowledge to eventually become a power hub for exporting hydrogen. So eventually the opportunity is not just in internal use in Victoria or across the states, but we really well placed for becoming exporters of hydrogen to the countries that have shown interest on importing hydrogen, basically for our location, mostly on the geography. If we pass to the next slide, please. We've done a little bit of calculations on the 90,000 tons per annum that the net zero by 2050 scenario indicates for by Victoria domestic hydrogen demand. And we came across that we will require 750 megawatts of solar, 1.1 megawatts of wind, and about 700 megawatts of electrolyser. And that's on top of what we've already mentioned on 12.9 case of megawatts requirement to basically cover for the 3 power stations that will be leaving the energy market in the next few years. So if we will become a hydrogen exporter and domestic use, we will require further investment and further solar and wind, which again is an opportunity for developers and investors. We've calculated about 4 billion of investment opportunity in the renewables and electrolyzers area by 2030, from which you can see the split. In green, we can see the wind, in yellow, we can see the solar, and in red, we can see the electrolyzers. Also, it'll be worthwhile mentioning that if the offshore wind developments that Honourable Lily D'Ambrosio have mentioned just before came up to be, which will not just give new jobs to potential lost jobs with the power stations retirements, this could be a power hub that could be utilized for green hydrogen as well. If we can pass to the next slide, please. The LCOHU is a really good way to see what will be the levelized cost of hydrogen by the price of electricity and the capacity factor of the electrolyser. So if we try to simplify, there is 3 areas and aspects that will make hydrogen viable. One will be the cost of electricity. The other one will be the capacity factor of the electrolyser. And the other one will be the decrease of the capex of the electrolyser. While we have done a study between today, 2021 and 2030, we can see the differentiation between the Australians per megawatt hour that will basically hopefully get the LCOHU by 2 kilograms in Australian dollars. For that, if we go to the next slide, we can see, and that was a really good exercise that my modeling team is done, is if we take away what the capex of that electrolyser will be, we can see that we could already be about 3 Australian dollars per kilogram of hydrogen on 2022, getting down to the $2 per kilogram of HU that we want to achieve. So basically, from the 3 factors that affect the hydrogen economy, the major one that affects for the next 10 years, if not 15, is the capex of the electrolyser. If that could be supported by subsidiary, then the hydrogen economy is readily available. If we can pass, please, to the next slide. We'll just get into renewable potentials with rooftop solar and the integration with the electrical fleet. There is a lot of comments in here that I'll leave it for you when you receive the presentation. I've just got a few minutes to cover for electrical vehicles, so I'll keep it really simple. But the really important part to notice in here is the importance of getting really smart on the integration of electrical vehicles and basically charge the electrical vehicles really smart at the time where we have the dark curve going down, so the electricity prices are going down, and so at the same time we can support system strength. So basically for that, there will be an investment of smart charging. And if we please go to the next slide, that will explain that because we in Victoria particularly, most of the employees will be traveling to the city and by car rather than other public transportations. The requirement of being smart with the charging in the middle of the day will need to be made public, and the smart charging and public centers for charging will potentially be required in the city. That's an opportunity for potentially charging between 642 to over 100 electrical vehicles by 2030, if not more. So what we can see is around a 66% uptake on renewable vehicles by around 2034, and that's with not basically a step change, not totally, because Lily D'Ambrosio was mentioning that by 2030 we could take up to 100. So for that, we will require some subsidiaries to achieve those numbers. If we can please go to the last slide. In here we can see, and this is different to the other states, is that we've got about 3.9 million drivers, and from those, mostly, if you can see the green line of the left, they mostly drive the cars to go to work. So the smart charging will be required in the middle of the day on public locations, and for that, there will need to be investments on public locations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alba. Now, our next speaker I'd like to introduce is Peter Cowling, Country Head, Australia and New Zealand of Vestas. For those who are not aware, Vestas is a Danish manufacturer, seller, installer, and servicer of wind turbines. The company has over 140 gigawatts of wind turbines across 85 countries. Vestas has been a significant contributor to Victoria's energy transition, and Peter Cowling has worked in renewable energy in Australia and Asia since 2002. With a background in construction law and major projects, he has been involved in the construction of over 5,000 megawatts of wind farms in Australia and Asia, working for multiple wind farm OEMs across the region in sales, operations, and leadership roles. Peter's also a passionate advocate for renewable energy and its leading role in climate change mitigation. He'll be sharing some of his insights on operating in Victoria with you today. And with that, I'd like to hand over to you, Peter, to share more. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Tim. Nice to virtually meet you all. I'd like to begin by just paying my respect to the traditional owners of the land that I live on, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I'm fortunate, perhaps while we roll the slides in the background, maybe get started. I'm born and bred in Victoria, and those of us who went to primary school in Victoria back in the day got to go on an excursion down to the extraordinary lignite coal mines in the Latrobe Valley that have powered Victoria for as long as we've had reticulated electricity. And that's been our great boon and probably our great, challenge in overcoming in the transition. It's really cheap power. It's dirty, etc. And I must say, of all the parts of Australia that I've worked across in renewables, Victoria's always stood out as the big challenge. Like, how do you beat thermal power that is just so cheap? Sure, it's dirty, but there's no carbon price. So how do we do it? The real exciting news for me personally as a Victorian, but I think for the country and for the world, is that we are making that transition. And as the Minister mentioned earlier, we're making it really fast. We've seen a movement from 10-ish to, frankly, I think it's well over 26% now, certainly when you look at committed projects. in rapid order. We have seen one large old coal-fired power plant close. We now have a timetable for the next, and frankly, I do expect the rest from Alba's analysis to close relatively fast thereafter. Please move to the next slide, and I'll keep speaking to it. So Victoria's an exciting place. It's a bit of a canary in the coal mine, if you'll pardon the pun, because if you can convert an economy that has practically free coal at sort of power station minehead level, and convert that to renewables in quick order, then the world has a real chance, and that makes me very excited. Vestas has been in Australia since about 1998. We probably just shipped out our first few machines and didn't have a strong presence here. But when we had a chance to set up, we chose to set up in Victoria. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. Victoria, for some reason, was one of the early movers, long before the minister's time. Many governments ago, allowed the first few projects to come through. But Vestas today sits on an installed base just under 4 gigawatts in Australia. We have nearly 2 gigawatts under construction across Australia and New Zealand. And of that, I was trying to do the sums before, I should have prepared this, but a good 600 megawatts is under construction in Victoria on top of our existing base, which is substantial. We employ over 800 people now. Well over 300 of those are based in Victoria, and our whole corporate function is based in Victoria. And that was a decision made a while ago, but it's a decision that we continually reevaluate. And Victoria keeps coming up as the logical place to be. It's very convenient for me as Victorian, but frankly, I'm a wind person in this part of the world, and I'd have moved elsewhere if I needed to. The reasons, I guess, are complex, to do with partly geography. You can imagine I'm sitting down in the bottom right-hand corner of Australia there on the map, and really the wind farms do spread all over the place. But at the end of the day, you want to be working in an environment that is supportive of the industry, where you have enough of a home base. I think of my own parent company's history. Vestas arose in Denmark because the Danish government had a strong incentive back in the late 70s and early 80s, right? We like to go to places to set ourselves up where we have a strong base. And for lots, under lots of different governments, and very much under the current government in Victoria, we've had enormous support in Victoria. In past times, we've established factories, we've built projects, we've set up all sorts of initiatives. So I'll take you through some of those today. Please maybe head on to the next slide. So of the reasons for setting up in Victoria, it's been really clear for the last 6 or 7 years under the minister's government that we're here to transform this sector. We actually are sitting on one of the most extraordinary resources for a state. If you overlay it on the UK, for example, we're probably a tad smaller than the UK. We have an incredible resource of wind and solar, and it depends where you are in the state, but it's varied. There's a real diurnal pattern between the west and the east and the north. It's got just about everything you want as a developer in terms of optionality. The grid's not perfect, but the grid is expanding, and I'll come to that in a moment. But the backbone grid that runs right out west, where the vast majority of the wind resource is huge. It's a double circuit 500 kV line running right out into wind country, and that turns out to be a great asset as we roll out the new generation that will transform Victoria. I guess there's a whole ecosystem of support you want as a corporate, whether you're an investor or, in our case, an OEM and constructor. We in Australia design, build, operate, long-term maintain, and we do all of that out of Victoria. There are then probably a series of unique scenarios where we've got other reasons for being particularly active here. I won't talk about the current incentives underway because there are reasons, that's an underway process I can't talk about. But we were quite active in the previous VRET, and that was a fantastic fillip to the industry just at a time when really we needed some clarity. You don't necessarily get huge clarity in the Australian market from an overall national perspective. We've now got a 2050 net zero target, which is fantastic news, but there's not a whole lot of specific policy drivers. We tend to turn to states, and the Victorian government has been the first state to stand up and to consistently back the industry. And the nice thing is that for a huge part of Western Victoria, if you're a wind developer, easy to get 8 meters per second, right? That's goldmine stuff in most parts of the world. And it's not too far from grid. It's in a planning environment which is reasonably understanding. I mean, nothing's easy these days where we need a social license with our landowners and our neighbours, but the broader government arrangement that's been set up is quite conducive to expanded wind development. The broader ecosystem is also quite conducive. So the most mature tower fabricator for wind turbine towers is based in Victoria. I think the majority of my peers, when I look across other OEMs, have also chosen to base themselves in Victoria. Could you please flick to the next slide? Just wanted to quickly turn to the VRET 1. So for those that aren't aware, VRET 1 was an auction scheme which heavily prioritised local content and initiatives to develop the industry locally, to sort of build that social licence and the broader benefits for the Victorian community. As we move away from what has been a great benefit to us from traditional coal generation to the new normal. We built, we were successful, our clients were successful, I guess, with our technology offering on a turnkey basis, 2 projects totaling just under 600 megawatts. We have completed both of those projects, fair share of normal challenges across the industry, but successful projects from not just an OEM perspective and a developer perspective, but I think the community feedback has also been really positive, and that's been a really critical part of the overall strategy in Victoria. Please move us to the next slide. Thank you. As part of the VRET 1, we came up with a number of initiatives to help to flush out opportunities for the Victorian manufacturing sector. So if you're not familiar with Australia, Victoria of all the states has traditionally been the most manufacturing centric state for whatever historical, geographical, societal reasons. But that's very much been the case. So the car industry, the textile industry typically had a really big base in Australia. And unlike, similar to most OECD countries, we've seen a change over time as a lot of that manufacturing has been offshored. But we found an opportunity to actually bring a bit of wind turbine manufacturing into Australia. And we did that on a project-specific basis for the VRET, but the reason we did it was to expose sub-suppliers to the wind industry to what our standards are, how we work, who we are, the basics. We are a long way away from the rest of the world sitting in Australia sometimes. So this was a great way for us to introduce those players to what they'd need to do standards-wise, QA-wise, to get into our global supply chain. Please move to the next slide. And we produced a large number of components for those projects out of the local, what was actually once the Ford factory in Victoria, which is now closed down and it's being used for some really innovative things, including our production of wind turbines. We've also done some really deep research with a really interesting university called Deakin down in Geelong, on the edge of the real wind zone of Victoria. I think actually Minister D'Ambrosio was really quite involved in setting up what is called Carbon Nexus. And Nexus is bringing industry together with research to build better carbon fiber, basically. And Vestas is, I should tell the story just briefly. We would normally do this sort of research in Europe for good reason, right? We're close by, we're in the same time zone. That's where our research people are. But we managed to convince our internal team to have a really good look at Carbon Nexus in the lead up to the VRET 1, and they actually really liked what they saw. They had some really good research. They had an incredible facility for, it's basically a 1 to 10 scale model of a real carbon fiber production line, right? We don't normally get access to those. We normally have to deal with manufacturers who own those production lines. And if we want to do that sort of research, they kind of own the outcome. Because of the way this has been set up in Victoria as a really important sort of strategic research institute, we've had a great run. My European-based carbon experts are quite happy to deal with the time difference because the work they're getting done down in Victoria has been really exciting. We're actually doubling down on that. We're going to do a lot more with these guys, and we're really hoping that that'll lead on into manufacture of some of these carbon products. This team has developed super low energy carbon fiber. They've developed way more appropriate carbon fiber for wind, which is what we were aiming to achieve. We've also recently set up a training facility, or in the process of setting up a training facility in one of the, it's like a university combined with a technical college called Federation. And the diagram you see there in the middle is the faux tower, the mock wind turbine tower, completely kitted out with most OEMs, fall arrest systems and climbing systems and cranes and other classic training equipment that you might need if you're going to kit out an industry. So we're working really closely with the Victorian government. Please move to the next slide while I speak. Really closely on things like training, capacity development, right across the sector in order to facilitate the ongoing filling out of the Victorian generation sector. As Albert told you, there's a lot to go in Victoria. There's a lot of thermal capacity that we'll need to retire over the relatively near term, and we're actively building the capacity to replace that. I guess you would hear this in a lot of parts of the world when you look to invest. We're hitting, high levels of penetration, high levels of transition to renewables by 2030. I'm living this. I really believe it's going to happen in Victoria, and I think the state will be there to support us. Grid connection in Australia is not easy. And I say that, because end of the day, you look at Australia, we're roughly the size of Europe with roughly the population of London living in it. And that means we have quite a stretched out grid, quite a challenging grid from that perspective. So you need to know what you're doing. When you're in Victoria, I've got to say, you get the extra support of the Victorian government, who's quite conversant with what it takes to connect. So that's not always the case across Australia. And the whole ecosystem around grid connection is complex. And it's nice to have a partner in the Victorian government who can help us with that sort of stuff. It's definitely doable. We do have a great 500 kV backbone through Victoria, as I said earlier, which makes a big difference. Please move on to what might be the last slide, or am I on the last slide? I'm very close to time in any event. Thank you. Yeah, look, I might hand over to questions at this point, but the experience here has been interactive and supportive. I think that's my takeaway message. We're very happy to still be based in Victoria. We would not want to be in another state in investing in Australia, and we are still expanding significantly year on year. So thank you very much for your time.
Great, thank you very much, Peter. That's a fabulous presentation with some wonderful insights. To the audience, please start sending in your Q&As. I notice there's a few questions coming in on the chats. The chat function, best to put the questions on the Q&A. Now, I'd like to invite back all of our speakers and also welcome an additional speaker to join the panel, Anthea Harris, Anthea Harris is the Deputy Secretary of the newly formed Energy Group within the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning. Prior to this role, Anthea was Lead Deputy Secretary of Strategy and Planning Group at the Department of Economic Development, Jobs, Transport and Resources. Anthea was also previously the Chief Executive Officer of the Climate Change Authority and has held senior roles within Commonwealth Department of Climate Change and Energy Efficiency, led the Secretariat for the National Emissions Trading Task Force and held positions with the Victorian Department of Premier and Cabinet, Frontier Economics and at the Productivity Commission. So of course that we've got Anthea here today to share her wealth of knowledge. So look, the session is now open to participants to ask any questions you may have, and I will facilitate and moderate that. I'm just having a look at the questions that have come in so far, and the first one, Anthea, I might throw to you. It's around our willingness to share our climate change acts with other states. Follow up to that was, have we considered collaborating with other states on climate acts and so forth? A little bit sensitive, I imagine, but how do we work in that space?
Well, I'm sure the Minister might like to dip in here as well, but certainly the Victorian Climate Change Act is there for all to see, and we'd certainly, any other state that wanted to adopt a similar approach on Victoria would be all for it. And for our UK listeners, there will be a lot of things that will be familiar to you compared with your UK Climate Change Act in relation to legislated targets, the requirement to update those targets on a regular basis, and very public and clear reporting on what your plans are and how what action you've taken against those plans and how you're tracking. So it's a very transparent arrangement that really makes sure that there's can't be a world in which it's just talk and no action. It's a very transparent process.
Great, thanks, Anthony. Minister, did you want to add anything to that response?
No, only that we made a deliberate decision when we brought in that legislation in 2017 that discipline was a really key way to ensure success in terms of achieving our targets and sending really strong signal to the investment community and the broader economy is that this is the aspiration, but these are the steps. And these are the pledges. So we develop up based on our interim targets that we need to articulate 5 years ahead. We need to also accompany those targets, those interim targets, with sector pledges. So across all of the sectors that we need to decarbonise. So it's a very, very strong set of policy framework, direction, so that industry, the broader economy, can have a really good sense of where the government is heading and the investment decisions that they need to make to be able to assist to meet our decarbonisation agenda. And it's the discipline that you get from that. Now, I'm very happy for other states to jump on board. They've not yet done that, but I think ultimately we are the ones that are getting the big benefits from having done so.
Indeed. Thank you, Minister. And I think that response went some way to answering a question that came in around, I suppose, Australia's international reputation and what we're doing in this and how do we attract investors. And I think, that's something we can only control what Victoria does and make our intentions very clear. And you've answered that well there. So that takes care of that one. There was also a question around electric vehicles. And I think, Alba, you went into great detail. So I think this question may well have been answered, but perhaps just a summary of it. The question was, what measures are you implementing to encourage the shift to electric and hydrogen vehicles? Is the EV tax helpful in improving air quality and reducing CO2 emissions? I suppose, perhaps some insight into how our approach on that. Alba, did you want to answer that on the electric vehicles?
Yeah, so obviously, if you use carbon neutral vehicles, you will most definitely support with the carbon neutral sort of situation. And also the zero emissions vehicle subsidiary is available by the government Victorian residents to purchase electrical vehicles valued at $3,000. So that's a very good subsidiary to, I guess, get us started. So it is, the uptake looks really healthy. We've done a little bit of a run around of what will be the uptake and what the Victorians wants to do in terms of moving towards the next electrical vehicle. And we got that 56% would think that the next car that they will purchase will be an electrical vehicle. So that was a very good outcome. So if you think about that, we have 3.9 million passenger vehicles in Victoria. So that will be about 1,054 Ks of electrical vehicles by 2030.
Great, thanks. Any comments from anyone else on the panel around that? Otherwise, I'll move on to the next question. Peter, the next question, I think perhaps you touched on it with your collaborations with Deakin, but the question coming in is how important are partnerships with universities in helping to set up and build capacity and skills locally in Victoria?
Yeah, really important and happening relatively rapidly now, which is great to see. I was actually talking to someone today about this. The industry spent such a long time getting established, right? We start again, stop again, depending what subsidies we're doing and that sort of thing. And we didn't really take the time, and frankly, we were worried about the legitimacy of even training people up for a career in this crazy roller coaster industry. But it's clearly here to stay now. So we've got an absolute, well, I was going to say we've got a mandate. We've actually got a requirement to get out there as an industry and proactively encourage the right skills to be developed. So we've had a great experience with Federation. And Federation, for those that aren't aware, is a university that's also got quite a strong trade training component. I don't know what the UK European equivalent of that is, sorry, but it's both blue collar and white collar, if you like. So that's our primary focus. We've got about a dozen apprentices now training up on the tools, particularly things like, so they're classic maturing industry issues. We're starting to desperately need blade technicians, right? We didn't need blade technicians earlier on because we didn't have that many blades. But we've now got a hell of a lot of blades and they're getting older and they need more maintenance, and we can't just fly them in and out. So we're developing that skills base and working really closely with institutions like Federation to actually firstly develop the curriculum and secondly get it aligned with global curricula so that people that train in Victoria can then work in our workforce globally. We're working with partners, so it's not just a Vestas thing. The other OEMs, developers and others are getting involved, also coordinated by VicGov. So that's really great. We're also working with the universities. One of the, there's a number of things that are starting to come out of a really mature, fast-moving rollout as we're getting in Victoria. And that's things like grid skills, more advanced skills in electrical engineering. They're worth developing. And so we've got a couple of initiatives at the moment, some of which will become public in the next few weeks, actually, to develop internships and traineeships with the universities so that we're aligning the skills really well to the post-grad work market. So yeah, it's a work in progress, but it's actually, there's a real appetite for it. And I think, Victoria's an interesting place because we've had an industrial background and that necessarily has changed as the world has changed. And it's been great to be able to repurpose all of those skills to a renewable future instead.
Great, thanks, Peter. So important. I call it the race for talent and the need for us to develop our skills. We're seeing it already with these emerging industries of the future, space, advanced manufacturing and climate change as it heats up, that I think that's going to be a real challenge for all countries and jurisdictions around the world to be able to attract the appropriate talent to train up their own talent as well organically.
Well, and frankly, to be really selfish about it, it's a pretty damn good place to live too. So it's actually, until COVID, where it got a bit hard to import people, it's a pretty good place to sort of steal people from other countries and settle in Melbourne. It's a stunningly good place to live, but that's not particularly sustainable. So we are developing our own engineers here now.
Well, Peter, I know under the UK-Australia FTA proposal that's being discussed, and we're all sort of hoping will be signed shortly. There is an opportunity for, I think, youth, as they're calling it. These are people under 35 to have 3 years working experience in each other's country. So as you say, yes, that is an advantage we have, the livability in Victoria. So moving on to another question, it's around storage and, you know, I suppose the variability in renewable energy generation. And, you know, the question asks the panel, what are Victoria's plans regarding efficient, affordable and reliable energy storage? Who's best placed to perhaps answer that? Anthea, did you want to touch on that angle?
I'm happy to start, and Minister, unless you'd like to, but
you can start it. I can add.
Okay. Well, actually, the Victorian government's actually got a very strong record in terms of supporting large-scale battery projects. So there's already a number of batteries that have been in operation for quite some time, but some new and exciting developments. So under commissioning process right now is the Victorian Big Battery, which is a very large battery that's a 300 megawatt, 450 megawatt hour battery that's being installed west of Melbourne, and that's actually going to be playing a really interesting role in our system. So not only is it doing normal battery things, but it's actually there really as virtual transmission to back up our transmission interconnect between Victoria and our northern neighbours in New South Wales. And in addition, and Alba talked about this issue earlier about the fact that one of our very large power stations, coal-fired power stations, is going to be closing in 2028. And as part of an arrangement that was agreed between the owners of that power station and the state of Victoria, so before that power station closes, another very large battery, 350 megawatts, 4 hour storage, will need to be constructed by 2026. So there are a number of, so there has been a lot of support already for batteries, and that's at the large scale end. Also in the solar homes program, which is a very large scale program that the Victorian government is rolling out, there's significant support for the small scale end of the battery world as well. So in terms of batteries for households. So again, all adding to that storage picture, which we know is important for addressing issues like minimum demand, all of those kinds of things. But also as we increasingly find that batteries can play so many roles, and we're still learning really, I think all of the sorts of things that the Swiss Army knife of the energy world can do.
And if I can add, Tim, thank you to Anthea's comments. We moved very early as a state to understand the need to facilitate investment in large battery technology. And frankly, without government investment, the market just isn't in a state just yet to be able to sustain itself, frankly. So we understood the need to do that. So we supported 2 large batteries before we landed on the Victorian Big Battery, which is the largest in the Southern Hemisphere. And I think for a period of time it was the largest in the world. I think we got overrun by some place in America, but it's certainly the largest in the Southern Hemisphere. But certainly we supported 2 large batteries. One is a part of a fully integrated solar farm behind the meter, and I think that might actually be one of the largest ones in the country at least. So there's more to be done there, but we understand the connection between the small scale battery and consumer choice, people coming in behind the revolution in terms of the energy transition. Part of being, I think, successful in managing the transition is to be able to, as a politician, to be able to communicate with our citizens so that they, in a way that, and also understand how this transition can actually be touched and felt by them and owned by them. And part of that is about, you know, the biggest program that we have in running rebates out for solar panels on roofs. You know, that's the biggest program in the country. a really big program on running our, small batteries that can complement that. And that really does go a long way to cutting through some of the difficulties that the country has had, if you like, in terms of that challenge of getting through that climate change debate. But the big storage is absolutely something that we move very early on, and certainly we'll be doing more of that as our sector matures, and also, of course, as we see more of the large generators make decisions to move on. That is the lignite ones.
Great, thank you, Minister. Just as a follow-up, I guess, and I think you've sort of answered in the sense that, obviously the Victorian government's open to all of these ideas, but the question is, are there incentives to manufacture hydrogen fuel cells in Victoria? Any view on that? I guess we're open to the ideas.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we developed and released our renewable hydrogen industry development plan that we released a number of months ago, and that was underpinned by some investment dollars that I stepped through in my contributions earlier on. There is certainly more work that is underway. The next piece of work around I suppose the next steps that we need to take to develop further the renewable hydrogen sector in our state. At the moment, though, we're busy working through some really fantastic proposals that have come into our Energy Innovation Fund, and also some of that, of course, is about renewable hydrogen. Some of it, of course, is the offshore wind. There's some fantastic proposals there, which I can't say much more about, but I know Anthea has reported that there's some really terrific ones in there, and hopefully we'll be in a position not too distant future to be able to make some really great announcements on that front.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Minister. I think we have time for one more question, and the apologies to all the questions are coming through fast and furious now, but perhaps to wrap up, just trying to find the most useful one. There was a question earlier on about the viability of carbon capture and storage projects in Victoria. Did we want to have a look at that, given the connection to various aspects of it?
Yeah.
Who would like to answer that one?
I'm happy just to make a comment if that's okay. So certainly carbon capture and storage is a program that in Victoria that there's been support for that over a number of years. The program continues to be supported, and certainly it's going through its paces. But we do understand that the need to move towards decarbonisation is really just accelerating. And so whilst that is happening over there, it is really critical that not only do we identify the low-hanging fruit in terms of where effort needs to go to make the big step change that we need to, and get the economic advantage from that also in terms of dollars coming into our state and jobs being created and skills developed and projects being built, and halving our emissions by 2030. Alongside, of course, continues to be that work and that investment in carbon capture and storage.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Minister. I think we've run out of time. We probably could have had another half hour to answer all of these questions coming through, and I think we can follow up and answer ones what we can online. But I'd like to thank the panel, especially you, Minister, taking time out of your busy schedule, but Peter and Alba for providing your expertise and first-hand experiences dealing with Victoria, and Anthea for the wealth of knowledge that you've brought and being able to answer some of those particularly tricky questions that came up. It's been great to have you here, and I think the story for Victoria continues in this space, and it's a positive one. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So just as we prepare to wrap up, as I'm sure you have heard from today's session, Victoria is leading the way with renewable energy investment in Australia. I hope that you've enjoyed today's session, and if you're interested in learning more about the opportunities in Victoria, please reach out to our office here. This is the Victorian Government Trade and Investment Office here in London, Our details will be forwarded around in the presentation after the session. But also there's lots of help and advice on the ground up here. There we go. There's the Invest Victoria slide. It does a quick overshow of what we provide and the types of services that we can do, going from site location and property identification to information and advice around preparing a business case to enter, around regulatory information and introductions to the relevant players. We can provide all of that. And as I was alluding to before, there's also lots of other advice available from people operating in the market up here. The Australia-UK Chamber of Commerce, Austrade, the Australian Trade Commission is there as well. So just be aware, we offer free and confidential services to companies looking to set up in Victoria, including market regulatory information. And I'd really like to thank the team at the Australia-UK Chamber of Commerce for their support in coordinating today's session. In particular, Joanne Holland, who's the Executive Director of the Australia-UK Chamber of Commerce. Joanne's an experienced CEO who's had 20 years experience working in C-suite roles on behalf of UK investors and in multiple sectors and across multiple countries. So we're very pleased to have Joanne leading the charge on behalf of Australian industry up here in London. And Joanne, I'll hand over to you for closing remarks. Thank you to your team. Thank you to the Department of Environment, Water, Land and Planning staff back home in Melbourne who worked with you to deliver this event. It's been fabulous. Over to you, Joanne.
Thank you very much, Tim, and thank you to the Minister and all the panellists. It's been invigorating and exciting, and we're delighted at the Chamber to be supporting the Victorian Government in this quest to deliver renewable energy. There are wonderful opportunities, and I think we've seen that all today. Just a quick note that the Australian UK Chamber of Commerce is an independent UK-based membership organisation, and we connect businesses and people and opportunities. So just to follow up with what Tim said, the Victorian Government provides a lot of contact points and opportunities, and so does the Chamber. We work very closely together, and I do invite you to contact us at helloaustralianchamber.co.uk. We wish you a very pleasant morning, evening, and thank you for your support, and we look forward to working with the Victorian Government again on many other events like this. Thank you.